Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Toast to History, where we take a look at whiskey history with a glass in hand, of course. I am Kip, your whiskey tour guide, and let's get into it. Let's talk about the original whiskey. Now, just like in any historical context, there is always going to be a debate on who made whiskey first. Now, when it comes to whiskey, that's going to come down to two countries, Ireland and Scotland. Both of them are going to lay claim to being the first to make whiskey. But from the historical perspective, all we have to go on is written record. Was whiskey, defined as a grain spirit, spirit distilled from grain, was that being made prior to what we have as the first written record? Probably. Just like in most things in history, there's always going to be a first that's not going to be listed as the first because people come up with it, it's not recorded, etc., etc. But from a historical sake, we have to go by written record. Now, there is a reference to aqua vita, which is that Latin term that was ascribed originally to grain spirit, translated into the Irish and Scottish Gaelic of, depending on dialect, that Ushka Batha, Iska Baha. In 1405, that's right, 1405, there is a record in the Irish Annals of Clockmanese, or something to that effect. Pardon my pronunciation, I do not understand it. But it says that a head of household died on Christmas Day from a surfeit, or an excessive amount, of aqua vita. Well, that's a Christmas to remember, I suppose. So, 1405, we have a first written record of whiskey. But we do not have a record of if that individual, who was unnamed, made it, if he got it from someone in town. We don't know anything other than that somewhat vague reference in those Irish records. It's then almost 90 years later that we have the first written record of a whiskey being made or distilled. And that happens to be in the Exchequer of Scotland in 1494, where it states that the King of Scotland issued 7 bowls of grain to Friar John Core to make aqua vita. That is the first written record of whiskey being made or being distilled. So, even though there's always going to be some argument, the majority, at least in my reference of historians, agree that that is what we classify as the first whiskey being distilled, the first reference to whiskey being made in any form. And of course, it's for the king. Now, Friar John Core, obviously by his name, was a monk at the local Lindores Abbey. I like to joke with people and say, listen, your religious affiliation, I guess that's between you and your creator, but if you are an atheist, you are on the wrong side of alcohol, because without exception, beers, ales, meads, wines, and distilled spirits were all started by monks, missionaries, theologians, and members of the Christian faith. So you can take that for what it's worth, but thank your local clergyman for the good stuff. Now, as the years have passed, Lindor's Abbey has now, today, turned into a full-blown distillery. And last fall, when I was in Scotland, I picked up this guy right here because the historian in me and the theologian in me, I had to have it. This is Lindor's Lowland Single Malt Scotch. This is the exclusive cask. This was a barrel store pick for a store in Edinburgh on the Whisky Trail. And it's at 100 proof. That's actually what's in my glass right there. You can see that's a UK exclusive. Whew, fruity. Very fruity. Subtle sweetness, but fruit forward with little hints of maltiness as well. And it's delicious. Now, I might be biased. The historian in me and the theologian in me loves this. And then when I was back in Scotland in April, a few months ago, found this guy, which again, it's a UK exclusive. What I loved about this one is, it's Lindor's Lowland Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. And then the label, the title for this one is Friar John Core, the Cask Strength Congregation Batch. Chapter 2. And this is their single malt coming in at cask strength or barrel strength at 121.8. I have not cracked this one yet. Hanging on to it for a minute. It'll get cracked though. But absolutely love this. This is, of course, from the Lindor's Abbey Distillery now in Newburgh, Fife. So, for me, the historical perspective, love it, think it's great. But it is also what we view as the origination of whiskey. And even if there was whiskey being made prior to that, which there was in some regard, this would be the origination of what would come to be known as commercial distillation. And by commercial, I mean by monks in monasteries, but for retail, for the king, for whatever purpose. So that is our toast to history. Where did whiskey come from? Well, it came from the church. God bless them. Hope you guys have a good one. We'll see you next time. Cheers.